James Reaper Callahan had spent years riding with the Hells Angels, living by a code of loyalty, power, and violence. He had once been feared on the outside, his name synonymous with drug trafficking, extortion, and brutal retaliation. But now, the roar of his Harley had been replaced by the cold silence of prison walls. His downfall had come swiftly. A botched weapons deal turned into a bloodbath, leaving two rival gang members dead. With the authorities already building a case against him, it was only a matter of time before they took him down. Betrayed by someone within his own ranks, he had been sentenced to life without parole. The trial had been a spectacle, but prison was where the real punishment would begin. As Callahan stepped off the prison transport bus, his wrists cuffed and his ankles shackled, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The yard was filled with hardened criminals, men who had built empires behind bars, each one belonging to a faction more ruthless than the next. Some of them knew exactly who he was, others didn't care. To them, he was just another inmate, a fresh target, a potential ally, or worse, a walking dead man. The guards led him through the dimly lit corridors, past rows of cells that reeked of sweat, urine, and desperation. Inmates leaned against the bars, whispering and sneering as he passed. Some recognized him immediately. "Well, well, look who it is," a voice sneered from one of the cells. Callahan didn't turn his head. He knew better than to acknowledge the taunts. To show weakness on day one was to sign your own death warrant. At intake, he was stripped, searched, and handed a standard-issue jumpsuit before being assigned to his cell. His cellmate was an old-timer, a man who had long accepted that he would die behind these walls. He barely glanced up as Callahan stepped in. "Used to be a big shot, huh?" the old man muttered. Callahan didn't respond. He simply sat on the steel bunk, staring at the chipped paint on the walls. Outside, the whispers continued. Everyone wanted to know how long he would last, and deep down, so did he. Prison wasn't just a place to serve time, it was a battleground. From the moment James Callahan entered, he knew the real power didn't belong to the guards or the warden. It belonged to the gangs inside. The racial divide was law. The Aryan Brotherhood controlled the white inmates. The Black Guerrilla family ran the black population, and the Mexican mafia ruled over the Latino prisoners. The Hells Angels had influence too, but Callahan was no longer one of them. He was a man without a flag, and that made him a target. It didn't take long for the word to spread. Reaper was in. Some still respected him. Others saw an opportunity to strike. A former Hells Angel in prison wasn't just an inmate. He was a liability. His old brothers couldn't risk him talking, and his enemies wanted revenge. The first warning came fast. A note slipped under his cell door. "No rats. No ex-members. You're already dead." Callahan wasn't surprised. He had seen this play out before, but now he was on the wrong end of it. At mealtime, he felt the tension. His old gang sat together at one table, ignoring him completely. Across the room, a group of Aryan Brotherhood members watched him closely. Was it an offer of protection, or were they waiting for an opening? The guards, supposedly the keepers of order, had their own rules. Some were indifferent, others were worse than the inmates. A few even worked with the gangs, smuggling in drugs or looking the other way when a beating went too far. One guard, Officer Daniels, pulled him aside after chow. "You got a problem coming your way," he said quietly. "Your old crew doesn't want you breathing." Callahan nodded. He had expected as much. "You got two choices," Daniels continued. "Find someone to back you up, or pray you wake up tomorrow." There were no friends in prison, only alliances. If Callahan wanted to survive, he would have to make a choice, and fast. Because in here, being alone meant being a dead man. James Callahan knew that in prison, respect was earned through violence, and if you weren't feared, you were prey. His first real test came just days after his arrival. As he made his way back to his cell from the yard, two inmates blocked his. Before they could finish him, the guards rushed in, batons swinging. Callahan was thrown into solitary, left to bleed in a dark, windowless box. Days passed in silence, his only company the rats that scurried beneath the door. His wound festered, untreated, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. This was part of the system: break the body, break the mind. But Callahan had survived worse. When he was finally released back into general population, he found a tray of food waiting on his bunk. Beside it, a folded note. "You're not dead yet." Might be useful. No name, no signature. Someone had taken an interest in him. The next day, he found out who. An older prisoner named Vargas, a high-ranking member of the Mexican mafia, was watching him. "You fight like a man who wants to live," Vargas said. "That means you need protection." Callahan knew what that meant. In prison, protection came at a cost. He could refuse and remain a walking target, or he could align himself with a new power. T wasn't a choice, it was survival. As he shook Vargas's hand, he knew one thing for sure. His war inside these walls had just begun. James Callahan had seen revenge play out 100 times before. But now, he was the target. The Hells Angels never forgave betrayal, and in prison, they had the reach to make sure he didn't last long. The first attempt came at night. Callahan had just closed his eyes when he heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. His instincts screamed at him, "Move now." He rolled off his bunk just as a sharpened piece of rebar slammed into the mattress where his chest had been. His attacker, a low-level gang member looking to earn favor, cursed and lunged again. Callahan fought back, managing to wrestle the weapon away before guards stormed in. The next morning, word spread, the Hells Angels had put a price on his head. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about sending a message: betray the club, and you'll die slow, no matter where you hide. The prison politics only made things worse. The Aryan Brotherhood refused to back him, seeing him as damaged goods. The Mexican mafia, despite Vargas's protection, warned him that their help only went so far. If the Angels wanted him dead bad enough, they would get to him eventually. He was forced to watch his back at all times. Every meal could be poisoned, every shower could be his last. The guards wouldn't help. Some were on the Angels' payroll, turning a blind eye when needed. Then came the second attack. A riot broke out in the yard, and in the chaos, Callahan felt hands grab him. Someone tried to drag him behind the weight benches, where he wouldn't be seen. A razor blade flashed. He barely dodged the first slash, but the second caught his cheek, splitting his skin open. Bleeding and desperate, he fought like a man who refused to die. A wild punch sent his attacker sprawling, but Callahan knew the war wasn't over. He was a dead man walking. As he sat in his cell that night, pressing a rag against his wound, he realized something. If I don't make a move soon, they'll bury me here. His choices were clear: kill or be killed, escape or die trying. James Callahan sat on his bunk, staring at the stained concrete walls of his cell. The past few months had been a brutal lesson. Prison wasn't just a cage, it was a death sentence. The Hells Angels weren't going to stop until he was buried, and the only question left was how he would die. Slowly, bleeding out on the cold floor, or fighting for his life on his own terms. For the first time in years, he thought about the choices that had led him here. The first time he rode with the Angels. The first time he pulled the trigger for them. The brotherhood, the loyalty, the power. It had all seemed worth it. But now, when he needed them most, they had turned on him. A scarred man like him wasn't built for redemption. No priest could wipe away the blood on his hands. But escape? That was something else entirely. The plan formed slowly. He studied the guards, their routines, the blind spots in the security cameras. He listened to the whispers in the yard, searching for weaknesses. He knew the risks. Most men who tried to escape ended up shot, beaten, or worse. But if he stayed, death was guaranteed. One night, as the prison settled into its uneasy silence, Callahan moved. He had bribed the right people, made the right threats, and now everything was in place. He slipped into the maintenance tunnels, his heart pounding. Every step brought him closer to freedom, or the end of his life. Then came the final test. A lone guard blocked the exit, a man Callahan had seen working with the Angels before. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Callahan knew he wasn't making it out without blood being spilled. The fight was quick, brutal. Callahan didn't hesitate. He couldn't. A single well-placed strike dropped the guard, and Callahan took his keys, his uniform. As he walked toward the prison gates, dressed as one of them, his mind flashed back to the life he was leaving behind. The VI,